Welcome to part 2 of the head replacement of our Volkswagen Jetta 2.0. What we're doing here is we're draining all the coolant and we are pulling off all of the coolant hoses. It'll be hard to see some of this, but basically what you have to do is remove any coolant hose that connects to the head itself. You'll see, and I pointed out in a minute here, there's a metal pipe that goes up and around the head. I believe you're supposed to remove the entire metal pipe. I didn't. What I did is I just pulled it up out of the way a hair and I was able to reach the bolt that was there. I'm sure, like I said, you're not supposed to do that because you could potentially crack the pipe if it's rusty, yada yada. This pipe was in perfect shape. I didn't foresee any real issues coming from it, and it ended up causing no issues throughout the entire thing. Everything was fine. I probably only tweaked it, a little tiny hair, so it went right back into place when I was done. The other thing to note about this part of the disassembly is the coolant temperature sensor goes into a housing. It's a super common failure item. While you're in there, you may want to just replace your coolant sensor and make sure that it's not leaking. The housing itself, I believe they sell a metal one that you can replace it with nowadays. Not a bad option if you have to replace it, if it's cracked or leaking or whatever. The metal one is a great alternative. So just be aware, while you're in there, it's a good time to replace it. You're going to have it all apart anyway. I didn't replace it on this one because it was actually fine. They had it all glued in and stuff. I don't know why. I have a feeling that the O-ring needed to be replaced, which I did. It came with the kit. And before you start, I just wanted to make a note. On the radiator, on the driver's side, there is a little valve that you open, and it just drains the coolant. Start draining your coolant before you start popping pipes off, because if you start popping pipes off first, the coolant's going to get everywhere. Make sure you have catch cans under it. As I'm doing all this, I'm losing coolant everywhere, so whatever's residual in the head and stuff is going to get everywhere. So put catch cans underneath the car and then open up your the valve on the radiator and let it drain first a little bit, and then start taking everything else apart, and you won't lose as much all over the place, but you will still lose some. So just try to catch it, and then you'll be good to go. Mouse here, but I can't see why they would have done that. So just remember, this goes into the same spot as this. So the two studs came out with this. There's one bolt that goes on the top of this to hold in that bracket. I'm going to have to clean up all this stuff because I know this was leaking where the temperature sensor went in. I almost think I have a temperature sensor for these somewhere, if I can find it. Because I had to replace that on one of the cars. Alright. So now I got to figure out I took off. This thing has a big bolt on it. And I took off that. I'm going to have to take off the other side, I think. So what I'm working on here is the Egr Valve Pipe. What it does, it goes from the top there and it curves around to the back side of the engine. It's way easier to get to from under the car, the bottom side of the connection. The top side is easy, you can get to it right at the top. But just be aware, I can't remember what size this thing was, but I didn't have a good wrench for it, so I just messed with it, got it off. When I put it back on, I ended up finding the correct size wrench, and it was easier to put back on from underneath. But really kind of a pain to get this pipe off if you don't have the right size wrench, and if the car is not in the air. So this is where we get to a point where there's some missing footage. I cannot find it. I know I recorded it, but it's missing. So you need to know a few things before we pull the head off from here. The head itself we'll get into in a minute, but I'm going to show you, generally speaking, what needs to be done. Okay, so first things first, we need to remove that cover that has the EGR on it from the exhaust. It's from above the exhaust manifold. Here's a picture of it. What you do is there's 3 bolts along the top edge and you remove them. It's hard to see one of them, and I believe one of them was a smaller size. So what you do first is you remove the 3 bolts, and then this whole piece will come off. But there's another catch. The O2 sensor goes through the center of it. What you do is you have to take the O2 sensor, either unplug it from under the car, and here's the picture of where it plugs in. This is, if you look directly underneath the car where the passenger sits on the passenger side, there's this little black box that you take 2 10mm bolts off of, and it's got the 2 O2 sensors. Just trace the wire down and you'll be able to see which one you need to unplug. I believe it's the black one on the bottom. So that's pre-cat. Yeah, pre-cat is the one that you have to remove. So you unplug it, and then you can string it up, and then you don't actually have to take the oxygen sensor out. From here, if you did take the oxygen sensor out, you could just pull it out of the way and not unplug it under the car. If you do, well, let me put it this way. You really need to take it out because you're going to break the wires if you don't unplug it under the car. So I would just unplug it under the car, bring it up there, and then once you get the bolts off, you can pull that whole top piece right out. From here, then you have the exhaust manifold on the back of the head. So this is the exhaust manifold. What you do here is there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 bolts. You take them off. Sometimes the studs come out with it because, you know, rusty. They get hot and cold all the time. So if the stud comes out, no big deal. Just keep it together. You may have to break it apart so afterwards your manifold seats properly. But once you do that, basically you have 2 choices. You can take the exhaust manifold out completely by removing it from the rest of the exhaust pipe, or you can just leave it on there, and what I did was I just pulled it out of the way and we put it back up later on when we put the new head in. But that's it. Once you get those out, then you need to remove the head bolts. So the head bolts I would do in the order, the opposite order of what you see here. I would go 10, 9, 8, 7, blah, blah, blah. Shouldn't be a huge deal if you're removing the head and replacing it, getting it machined, whatever. You could probably just take them out however you feel like it. Note to self, you need this tool to remove the head bolts. It is super, super important that you get this tool. If you use a regular star end bit, one that fits in there, it may look like it's going to work, but you're probably going to strip the head bolt. It won't work for when you're putting the new head bolts in. You're just going to have a bad time. So don't do it. Get the tool. I think it was like $10, and then go from there. But after you get the head bolts out, then it's the video you see in front of you. I was told this thing was really heavy, and that's a total lie. You don't need to do what I do here. You don't need to use the engine hoist to pull it out. You can do this all by hand once you get the head bolts out. Make sure you also have the timing belt off and anything else out of the way. I believe there's a little bracket, if you're looking at the head on the left side, that has a couple bolts in it with the cam sensor on it. Not every model here has the cam sensor, so you may or may not. Your mileage may vary, I would say. I think you do have to still remove a bolt in that area. It's right underneath the camshaft sprocket. It's got a couple bolts there. I think it's only one that ends up being there at this point. If you had timing belt still all on there, you would have to remove all the covers and everything. I didn't have the timing belt covered on the car when I got it, so you're not going to see that here. And like I said in the last video, I believe I don't show you how to do the timing. Not a big deal. I'm sure there's another video you can find, and if not, I'll probably show you in the future how to do it on another car. So that's it for this episode. There's more coming. See you in the next one.